They say time heals all wounds. But when someone throws acid in your face, time doesn't heal anything. It just teaches you how to live with a monster's signature carved into your skin. My name is Eleanor, I'm 75 years old, and for 40 years I've worn the map of hell on my face. But this isn't a story about victimhood. This is about the day I watched my demon die screaming, and realized that sometimes the universe keeps better score than we ever could. If you've ever wanted justice for something that felt impossible to forgive, stay with me. Because what happened 40 years after that night will shake you to your core. And if this story moves you, hit that like button now so others who need to hear this can find it. Let me take you back to 3 months ago. Picture this, a small-town diner in Oregon, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tastes like it was brewed during the Nixon administration. I was sitting in my usual corner booth, the one where the light doesn't hit too directly, wearing my usual wide-brimmed hat and high collar. After 4 decades, you learn how to navigate a world that doesn't want to look at you. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when I heard it. A name I hadn't spoken out loud in 40 years. The waitress, sweet girl named Maggie, was talking to the cook through the kitchen window. "Did you hear about Richard Vance?" she said. "The old guy who owns that property on Marsh Road? Apparently, he's dying. Pancreatic cancer. They're saying weeks, maybe days." Richard Vance. My hands started shaking so hard I had to put my coffee cup down. The room tilted. Because Richard Vance was the man who destroyed my face. The man who destroyed my life. And he was dying. To understand what happened next, you need to know who I was before I became this. Before I became the woman who makes children cry and adults look away. I need to take you back to 1985. I was 35 years old, and I was beautiful. I'm not being vain, it's just a fact. Long auburn hair, green eyes, a smile that my mama said could light up a room. I was a legal secretary at a firm in downtown Portland, engaged to a man named David, planning a wedding for the fall. Richard Vance was a client. 52 years old, recently divorced, wealthy from commercial real estate. He came into the office one day for a contract review, and from that moment, he decided I belonged to him. It started with compliments. Flowers delivered to the office. Invitations to dinner that I politely declined because I was engaged, because I wasn't interested, because something about his smile made my skin crawl. But Richard Vance wasn't a man who understood the word no. The gifts became more expensive. The calls more frequent. He started showing up at restaurants where David and I were having dinner. At my apartment building. At my church. My boss, Mr. Henderson, pulled me aside one day and suggested, very carefully, that I should be nicer to Mr. Vance, because he was an important client. Be nicer. As if my politeness was the problem. As if my existence as an independent human being was somehow an insult to this man's ego. If you're already feeling the rage building, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever dealt with someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? Because what I'm about to tell you gets so much darker. And make sure you're subscribed because this story has layers you won't believe. The harassment continued for 6 months. 6 months of my life spent looking over my shoulder, changing my routine, begging people to believe that this man was dangerous. But he was charming. He was wealthy. He was respectable. And I was just a secretary who was probably overreacting. Even David started to get frustrated with me. "Just tell him you're not interested and move on," he'd say, as if I hadn't been doing exactly that for half a year. Then came Valentine's Day 1985. I was walking to my car after work, arms full of files I was taking home, when Richard stepped out from between 2 vehicles. He was holding roses. 75 red roses. His eyes had this glassy, feverish look, and he was breathing hard like he'd been running. "Eleanor," he said, "I've been patient. I've been a gentleman. But you keep rejecting me, and I don't understand why. We're meant to be together. Can't you see that?" I tried to stay calm. I said, "Richard, I'm engaged. I'm not interested. Please leave me alone." And that's when his face changed. It was like watching a mask crack and something reptilian slide out from underneath. He grabbed my arm so hard I dropped everything I was carrying. "You think you're too good for me?" he hissed. You think that nothing of a man you're with deserves you more than I do? I could give you everything. I could make you a queen. But you'd rather throw yourself away on some middle management nobody. I yanked my arm free and ran. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove straight to the police station. I filed a report. I told them everything. The officer who took my statement was kind but ultimately useless. Has he physically harmed you? No. Has he made specific threats? Not exactly. Has he violated a restraining order? I don't have one. Well, ma'am, until he does something illegal, there's not much we can do. Men have a right to pursue women they're interested in. A right to pursue. Those words haunted me then, and they haunt me now. This is why so many of us stay silent. Because the system protects the predator until it's too late. If this is hitting home for you, please like this video. Your engagement helps spread awareness about how broken these protections really are. 2 weeks after the police station incident, I did get a restraining order. It took another encounter, another scene outside my workplace, and a supervisor finally witnessing Richard's behavior to get the legal system to pay attention. The restraining order was granted on a Tuesday. I felt, for the first time in months, like I could breathe. That Friday, David and I decided to celebrate. We went to a nice restaurant, drank wine, made plans for our future. We talked about children and houses and growing old together. Things that felt possible again now that Richard Vance had a legal barrier keeping him away from me. I remember David holding my hand across the table and saying, "See? It's over now. He can't touch you." We stayed out late, got back to my apartment around 11. David walked me to my door like he always did, kissed me goodnight, and headed back to his car. I went inside, locked the door, changed into my nightgown, and started washing my face at the bathroom sink. That's when I heard the crash. The sound of my living room window shattering. And then footsteps. Richard Vance had broken into my apartment. I ran from my bedroom, tried to lock the door, but he was faster. So much faster than I expected. He slammed through the door and grabbed me by my hair, yanked me backwards so hard I thought my neck would snap. I was screaming, fighting, but he was twice my size and 3 times as strong. He threw me onto my bed, and that's when I saw what he was holding. A bottle. A clear glass bottle filled with liquid. "You humiliated me," he said, and his voice was completely calm. Dead calm. "You made me look like a fool. You got a court order against me like I'm some kind of criminal. After everything I offered you. After how patient I've been." He unscrewed the cap of the bottle. "If I can't have you, Eleanor, no one will. And every time you look in a mirror for the rest of your life, you'll remember that you brought this on yourself. I want you to understand something about acid. About what it does. Because when people hear acid attack, they think of a quick splash and some scars. They don't understand the reality. The liquid he threw hit my face, my neck, my chest. And for about 3 seconds, nothing happened. I actually thought maybe it was just water, maybe he was trying to scare me. Then the burning started. It wasn't like fire. Fire you understand, fire you can process. This was something else. It was like having your skin peeled off with razor blades while someone held a blowtorch to the exposed flesh underneath. I screamed so loud I burst blood vessels in my throat. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I could smell my own flesh cooking. My hands were clawing at my face trying to make it stop, but touching it only spread the acid and made everything worse. Richard stood there for maybe 10 seconds watching me writhe on the floor. Then he dropped the bottle and ran. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, heard my screams and called 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, which felt like 8 hours. The paramedics tried to flush my face with water, but the damage was already done. Sulfuric acid doesn't just burn the surface. It keeps eating away at you, layer by layer, destroying everything in its path. They told me later that I went into shock from the pain. That my heart stopped twice in the ambulance. I spent 4 months in the hospital. I had 17 surgeries in the first year alone. They saved my eyes, which was a miracle, but my face? My face was gone. The acid had melted through skin, muscle, tissue. It destroyed my nose. It twisted my mouth into something that barely functioned. My neck was a mass of scar tissue that limited how much I could turn my head. The woman I had been, the woman who was beautiful, who was planning a wedding, who had a life full of promise, she died on that bedroom floor. I know this is hard to hear. But this is the reality for thousands of acid attack survivors around the world. If this story is affecting you, please comment below and let me know you're here with me. And hit that subscribe button, because what comes next is the part that will change how you think about justice forever. Richard Vance was arrested that night. He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. His lawyers were expensive and clever. They painted me as a temptress who had led their client on and then cruelly rejected him, driving him to temporary insanity. They talked about his clean record, his standing in the community, his charitable donations. They made him the victim. He was convicted, but not of attempted murder. Aggravated assault. He got 12 years. With good behavior, he could be out in 8. 8 years for destroying my life. 8 years for turning me into something people crossed the street to avoid. But you want to know what hurt worse than the legal system failing me? David left. The man I was supposed to marry, the man who said he'd love me forever, he visited me exactly 3 times in the hospital. The 3rd time, he sat by my bed, couldn't look at me, and said, "I can't do this, Eleanor. I'm sorry. I just can't." And he left. He married someone else 2 years later. My job? Gone. Mr. Henderson sent flowers and a card explaining that my position had been eliminated due to restructuring. The real reason was that my scarred face would upset clients. My friends slowly disappeared. They'd visit at first, but the visits got further apart until they stopped altogether. People don't know how to be around suffering they can't fix. It makes them uncomfortable. So they leave. I lost my face, my fiancé, my job, my friends, my life. All because I said no to a man who thought he owned me. I want to tell you about the years that followed, because they matter. I moved away from Portland, away from the memories and the people who knew me before. I settled in a small town on the Oregon coast where nobody knew Eleanor Hartley, the beautiful legal secretary. I became Eleanor Hartley, the recluse with the ruined face. I survived on disability payments and eventually a small settlement from a lawsuit against the building management company for inadequate security. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I lived alone in a small cottage near the beach. I wore high collars and wide-brimmed hats and sunglasses whenever I went out, which wasn't often. I had groceries delivered. I avoided mirrors because every time I saw myself, I saw him. I saw that moment. I saw his face watching me burn. For years, I was angry, consumed by rage. I fantasized about revenge in increasingly dark and elaborate ways. I wanted Richard Vance to suffer the way I'd suffered. I wanted him to lose everything. I wanted him to feel the same helpless horror I'd felt on that bedroom floor. The anger was the only thing that felt real. It was the only thing that made me feel alive instead of like a ghost haunting my own life. But anger like that, sustained over years, it becomes its own kind of prison. It was keeping me trapped just as surely as Richard's actions had. So slowly, painfully, I started trying to build something resembling a life. I took online classes. I started doing freelance transcription work from home. I adopted a cat named Mabel who didn't care what I looked like. I forced myself to go on walks at dawn when the streets were empty. Small steps. Tiny victories. I never forgave Richard Vance. I want to be clear about that. But I stopped letting him occupy every minute of every day. I stopped giving him that power. I was still Eleanor. Scarred, changed, broken in places that would never fully heal, but still Eleanor. Survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just getting through one more day. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, I see you. Drop a like if this resonates with your own journey. Which brings me back to that diner 3 months ago, to the moment I heard that Richard Vance was dying. I sat in that booth for 2 hours after Maggie mentioned his name, my coffee growing cold, my hands shaking. The rational part of my brain said to let it go. He was dying. Cancer was doing what I'd wished for him all these years. Justice, in its own way, was being served without me having to do anything. But there was another part of me, a deeper part, that needed to see it. That needed to look into his face and know that it was really happening. That needed him to see me, to see what he'd done, to carry that image with him into whatever came next. So I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I looked up where he lived. It wasn't hard. Small town, public records, a few strategic questions to Maggie about the property on Marsh Road. Richard Vance had been living 23 miles away from me for the past 15 years. 23 miles. We could have run into each other at any time. The thought made me physically ill. I found out he'd been released from prison after serving just 7 years. 7 years for destroying my face. He'd returned to his real estate business, quietly rebuilt his wealth, married a much younger woman who left him after 5 years, and lived alone in a large house on 5 acres of property. He'd done well for himself, apparently. The universe had not punished him. He'd gotten away with it. Until now. Until the cancer. I drove out to his property on a grey Tuesday afternoon. The house was one of those modern designs, all glass and angles, expensive and cold. There was a nurse's car in the driveway. A hospice care vehicle. This was really happening. He was really dying. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, working up the courage. What was I even doing here? What did I expect to accomplish? But I'd come this far. I'd spent 40 years carrying this weight. I needed to see the end of the story. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. A tired-looking nurse answered, and I said I was an old friend who'd heard Richard was sick and wanted to pay my respects. She hesitated, clearly uncertain about this strange woman in a wide-brimmed hat and high collar, but something in my voice must have convinced her because she let me in. The house smelled like antiseptic and death. That particular odor of a body shutting down. The nurse led me through a minimalist living room to a bedroom that had been converted into a hospice space. And there he was. Richard Vance was unrecognizable. The disease had eaten him from the inside out. He'd lost at least 80 pounds. His skin was grey and papery, stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent. His eyes were sunken, yellowed. He had tubes running in and out of his body. He was barely conscious, drifting in and out of morphine-induced sleep. "You have a visitor, Mr. Vance," the nurse said gently. She left us alone. I stood at the foot of his bed for a long moment, just looking at him. This shriveled, dying thing had once been the monster who destroyed my life. Had once been strong enough to overpower me, confident enough to think he owned me, cruel enough to burn my face off my skull. His eyes fluttered open. They drifted over me, unfocused at first. Then they sharpened. And I saw it. Recognition. And then fear. "Hello, Richard," I said quietly. I reached up and removed my hat. Then my sunglasses. I let him see the full extent of what he'd done. The scar tissue. The twisted features. The permanent damage. Remember me? This is the moment I'd waited 40 years for. If you need to know what happened next, make sure you're subscribed. And tell me in the comments, do you believe in karma? Because what came out of his mouth will make you reconsider everything. He tried to speak, but his voice was a rasping whisper. I had to lean in to hear him. "Eleanor," he managed. You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" I asked. "Did you think I'd just let you slip away without looking you in the eye one last time?" He closed his eyes. A tear ran down his wasted cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "And you know what?" I laughed. I actually laughed. Because after 40 years, after everything he'd taken from me, "I'm sorry" was so inadequate it was almost funny. "You're sorry," I repeated. "You're sorry now that you're dying and there's nothing left to lose. You weren't sorry when I was screaming on my bedroom floor. You weren't sorry during your trial when your lawyers called me a temptress. You weren't sorry when you got out of prison after 7 years and went right back to your comfortable life. You're sorry now because you're scared of what comes after this." His eyes opened again, and there was something desperate in them. "I was sick," he rasped. "Obsessed. I didn't understand what I was doing." "You understood perfectly," I said. My voice was steady, cold. "You made a choice. You decided that if you couldn't have me, you'd make sure no one else would want me either. You wanted to mark me, to own me, even in destruction. That wasn't sickness, Richard. That was malice. That was evil. He was crying now, proper sobbing, which seemed to cause him pain because he kept wincing and gasping. Please, he whispered. Forgive me. I'm dying. Please. I can't go like this. And this is the moment I want you to really understand. Because I'd fantasized about this for decades. About having him at my mercy, about making him suffer, about denying him peace. I thought it would feel triumphant. I thought it would feel like justice. But standing there, looking at this pathetic dying man, I felt nothing. The anger that had sustained me for so long, it was just gone. He was already destroyed. The cancer had done worse to him than I ever could have. He was going to die badly, painfully, and there was nothing I needed to add to that. The universe had handled it. I pulled up a chair and sat down next to his bed. I'm not going to forgive you, I said clearly. Because forgiveness isn't something you can demand, and it's not something you've earned. What you did to me was unforgivable. It was monstrous. And I've spent 40 years living with the consequences while you got to walk free. He made a strangled sound, but I continued. But I'm also not going to give you any more of my life. You've already taken so much. You took my face, my career, my relationships, my confidence, decades of peace. You don't get my hatred too. You don't get to occupy my thoughts as I leave this room. You're dying, Richard. In a few days or weeks, you'll be gone. And I'll still be here. I stood up, put my hat back on, my sunglasses. I came here because I needed to see that you were really dying. That the story really was ending. And now I have. So this is goodbye, Richard. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just goodbye. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard him struggling to speak, probably some final plea for absolution. I didn't turn around. I walked out of that room, past the nurse, out of that cold glass house, and back to my car. And as I drove away, something shifted inside me. The weight I'd been carrying, the obsessive loop of anger and revenge fantasies and why me questions, it started to lift. Not completely. Not magically. But enough that I could breathe differently. Enough that I could feel something other than rage. Richard Vance died 11 days later. I know because it was in the local paper. Small obituary. No mention of what he'd done to me or any of his other sins. Just the sanitized version that people tell at funerals. I read it once and then recycled the paper. The truth is, his death didn't change anything about my life. My face is still scarred. The opportunities one lost are still gone. The decades I spent hiding are still part of my story. But I'm still here. I'm 75 years old. I survived him. That's not nothing. If you've made it this far, thank you for witnessing my story. It's not the ending I would have chosen, but it's the ending I got. Please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is its own form of victory. I still live in my cottage by the sea. I still wear my hats and high collars. I still avoid mirrors when I can. But I also take my walks without checking over my shoulder anymore. I smile at Maggie when she pours my coffee. I adopted a second cat, named Pearl. I'm taking a ceramics class online. Small things. But they're mine. People always want stories about acid attack survivors to end with either complete redemption or tragic defeat. But real life doesn't work that way. I'm not fully healed. I'm not over it. I probably never will be. But I'm also not defeated. I'm not the woman I was, but I'm not the victim he tried to create either. I'm something else. Something I built from the ruins. And Richard Vance? He's dust now. He doesn't matter anymore. He doesn't get to be the main character of my story. I do. That's what I learned from watching him die. That justice isn't always about punishment or revenge. Sometimes it's just about outlasting them. About still being here when they're gone. About taking back the narrative they tried to write for you. I'm Eleanor. I'm 75 years old. I survived. And every day I wake up is a day I win. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of your own strength, please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, you are not what was done to you. You are what you build from what remains. Stay strong.